So I was pondering a little bit to do what would be a good way to talk tonight and to reflect and think about some of these kinds of issues. As we know, one of the what they're now calling institutional learning outcomes for the university is vocation. And how do we find our vocation? How do we think about that? And just because I'm a religious doesn't mean I'm talking about a religious vocation. I'm talking about how do we find what's that important thing that we need to do in our life. And I want to talk to you about it being a journey. It's not something that all of a sudden comes to you and it's constantly unfolding. I'm now in my mid to upper 70s and I'm still finding new things to do with my own vocation in life. So again, that's the concept of how it's developmental. But one of the things I wanted just to emphasize is a vocational journey is developmental. It moves, it grows, it has a dynamism to it. What happens during these 4 years will be a building block for you, but then as you get into your early work life and to married life and to other kinds of challenges in your life, you'll see that it unfolds. And basically what you're looking for is that inner call. Many of us believe it's planted by God in our soul, that spirit of ours, that what is God calling us to, that is going to make a difference in the world, right? That's going to do something that's important, that's going to contribute to the common good, but it also gives you a sense of satisfaction, a sense of joy. If you're not joyful, I don't think you've found your vocation, right? Now, I'm not joyful every day, but you know, I find times to be joyful just because I'm doing what I think the Lord has called me to, and I'm finding it's important to. So the one thing I want to do is that we're the part author of our life, of our journey. And I say part author because what? Relationships, other people, circumstances, events that happen in our lives shape how that story unfolds. We get to shape it by the decisions that we make, but we don't have free reign in that. And I'm hoping to illustrate how some of this. So events, people, situations, sometimes they really open up doors of opportunity. Other times they're big obstacles. They get in your way. You can't make choices that you think are really important. I had a few cute comments, but I'm going to, I don't. So I think, for all of us, there's this dimension to our vocation as the journey we go on. It's built around a story that gets planted with us early on in our life. I think all of us can understand the impact of our families and that our families have had on us. I grew up, I'm the oldest of 6 siblings, and as we talked about, grew up in Akron, Ohio. My dad was a graduate from the University of Dayton. That's really how I got attracted to the university and to the Marianists through his work in his chemical engineering. There's a building over there. Doc Woolhaven was the chemical engineering professor. He was a Marianist religious that helped my dad and others. There's a great story that happened. My dad was a football player here at the University of Dayton, and the football coach, who was Harry Bojan, the Bojan Field down there. So, okay, he was really mean. Oh, I got to watch my language here. He was tough. And he told my dad, look, if you don't come to practice, you can't keep your scholarship. My dad had to go to a chemistry lab, right, in the afternoon. So Doc Woolhaven said to him, look, I grade papers on Sunday afternoon. The chemistry building was, where the International Students Building is. It was above the women's gym at that time. And my dad was able to keep a scholarship because Doc Woolhaven went and made that kind of concession for him. So there's an affinity for my family to the Marianists and what they did for my dad. My mom was my dad's high school sweetheart. She was, she's the heart of the family, and she always taught us to see with our heart. And I could tell lots of good stories, but we only got a limited amount of time. I went through a Catholic grade school, and I suffered all the trauma that's part of that. I remember the first grade, my mom got called in by the Sister Elizabeth Ann for a conference about why was I coloring my coloring stuff and all purple. They thought there was some kind of psychological. So when my mom came home and she asked me why I had it, I told her that was the only crayon I had. So what else could I? I got kicked out of the choir in the 4th grade because I couldn't carry a note too well. I can always carry it after somebody else gets started, but I have a hard time, and it's been a trauma for the rest of my life. Another one was skipping school. Now this was really a character formation process. I thought I could skip the morning school. A bunch of us, 3 of us, went off, and I thought I'd go home and tell my mom I was sick, and she would write a note, and I could take that note in the next day, and the teacher would say, okay, you're fine. But I got caught. And my dad was one of those tough Germans who said, okay, you're going to have a punishment. And he used his belt. So he said to me, you're going to get 1 belting for skipping school and 9 for lying. All of a sudden that impressed upon me that there was something about telling the truth that was very important to him, and it's something that really stuck with me. So I think the important thing to recognize for me was just the strong formation in faith that really took root in my early life. I'm going to talk about what I call periods of deep discernment that take place different times where you really have to make some difficult choices. And so between my junior year in high school and the end of my senior year was a period of time for me. I went to a program called Operation Youth at Xavier University, and there I met Dr. Tom Dooley, who was a naval officer who worked helping refugees in Vietnam. And for us that don't know our history so well, there was a French Indochina War and the American Vietnam War. And in between there was a big problem with refugees that were really tortured. And what I was so admired about him was how he mobilized people to work with those refugees. And somehow he planted in me this, I want to be able to do something like that. I want to do something that's important. Going into my senior year, we had a great football team. I was the captain. I had just a wonderful girlfriend. But somehow this call of doing something for others was pretty important. And I think that, after a reflection and thinking about it, really struggling with myself, sometimes I felt like I was struggling with the Lord, I decided to join the Marianist. And one of the things, again, that made it, this is a really old pamphlet, but it's called Making Leaders. And that was something that really inspired me to think about what was the thing that I wanted to do with my life. And that concept of, I wouldn't say making leaders, but this ability to educate leaders was important. So in our early Marianist formation, we go through a boot camp, which is called a novitiate. You learn how to do all the prayers, the perspectives. You learn lots of different kinds of things that we played a lot of soccer and we did a lot of work, but we did a lot of praying and reflecting. So when I moved back down here for what was called our Scholasticate down here in Dayton, I began to study electrical engineering because I've, again, that connection with how an engineering professor had an impact on my dad was saying to me, if I wanted to have an impact, I could do that through something that I had some talent for, which was engineering. And so I studied electrical engineering. I was really graced, though, and this is where relationships come in, because I lived with a whole group of other Marianists. They were studying philosophy and theology and English and history. And guess what? We had great table conversations. They weren't going to talk about circuits and algorithms. We were going to talk about history and literature. And that turned out to be extremely enriching for me. That was something that I'd really, again, say, how do relationships help enrich your life? And they often come in unexpected ways. I really learned how to love literature here at the University of Dayton, to learn poetry. That was something that was important. I met a professor one of our Marianist priests was called Father Free. Now, I'm the Father Free professor of social justice, so there's obviously a connection there. Father Free was a Marianist philosopher, social philosopher, theologian. He had done a definitive work on social justice coming out of the papal encyclicals. And he was just inspirational that if you really wanted to make a difference, you had to transform society. You had to change the institutions of society. So I think that was very enriching. I went from here to teach at Hackett High School in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And this is where, you know, I just want to warn all of you, when you're a young person going into a new situation, I was one of those people who thought I knew it all. I thought I knew how to do different things. And of course, I ran into some clashes with some of the other teachers there at Hackett High School. You know, I knew some good stuff, but I was probably a little bit too pushy, a little bit too arrogant for my own good, and there was pushback. And so that was a time of conflict. I mean, I felt a little alienated out of that process, but it was a good learning process. I had to reflect and think about what was going on in that particular process. I just remember that at the end of that year, I had to make a decision whether I was going to make a perpetual commitment to the Marianists, my perpetual vows, which were lifetime vows. And again, if you catch what the story that I have from my father is, if you're going to make a promise to do something, then you're going to do it. So I knew if I was going to make this promise, I really had to commit myself to the long term. And so that was another, what I call decision point, another time of really reflecting and thinking about discerning what's the right direction. Fortunately, I did make those vows, and I'm been very graced because of that. I went on to study for my PhD in New York City and in Brooklyn, New York. We lived in our Marianist community there was in the middle of a Jewish settlement of Hasidic Jews, so I got a little experience of different cultural world. But the students that I went to school with were so cosmopolitan. They were French students. There were people from Italy. They were Jewish, a whole group of Jewish. And this school that I went to, Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn, on one year we celebrated the Christian holidays, and another year we celebrated the Jewish holidays. So we had ecumenical stuff way back in those, I guess interreligious back in those days. So my work was in that area of control theory. So I had this brilliant dissertation, which was never used too much, around controlling satellites, and yeah, it was I think very interesting. I think it got me to UD, right? It was, you know, I then came to UD to teach in the school in the electrical engineering department, and did some work in systems in the systems engineering department. Continued the work that I did in research. But one of the things, again, another opportunity that came around this vocation of educating leaders is, again, this time in history, the late 60s, early 70s was the Kent State uprising and all kinds of turmoil on campuses. Now, UD had lots of turmoil, and one of the roles that I played was not in the midst of picketing and so on. I was actually asked to sit down with students and try to figure out what could be some reforms that could take place on the UD campus. And so we really worked on some changes in the curriculum that met the students' needs. And what was great about that is I met two students that I still have a lifelong reflection and working with. One was Frank Sirico, who headed up this project that we had called Project Interface. The other one was Jan Lepore-Jenelson, both of whom now are the movers and shakers at East End Community Services here in Dayton. So it gives you a sense that, you know, people you meet and you have the opportunity to mentor go on to do some wonderful things in that. I began to think about social justice issues during that time. I did some work on the city with some system modeling. I worked with the Kettering Foundation as a fellow on the World Food Problem. And I had a chance to work with Catholic Relief Services, and that was great to help them do integrated integrated development in their work, and to be able to travel to South America, to Africa, and to Europe on some of those issues. My third period of deep discernment was in 1976. I was asked to be one of the candidates for president of the University of Dayton. At that time, it was only Marianists that could be president of the university. So there was a group of 5 that were asked to apply for the position, and the Board of Trustees was going to make a decision. Now here I am. All of them are 10 years older than I am, have much more experience. Some of them had been provosts of the university. In fact, 2 of them had been. And I said to myself, why am I asking to do, why have I been asked to do this? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But since my superior said, yes, we want you to do it, I went into it with the notion that if I could make a difference, if I could at least tell the Board of Trustees what kind of challenges I thought the university had, I would be doing a service to the university. Well, it turned out that I did too good of a job of identifying the challenges, and so at the age of 37, I was named president of the University of Dayton. Now, I don't know if that's pretty young for a president to be named. I did have a great year of transition that the Board of Trustees allowed me to take, and so what I did was I went and visited other what I thought were great universities. So I actually spent time at Notre Dame, and I had a chance to talk to Father Hesburgh and many people there. I went to the University of Pennsylvania and Stanford University just to see what other universities were doing. So again, this is just a point I want to make to you. In your vocational journey, push yourself out of your comfort zone. Go to places that have something to teach you, to have something to challenge you. Now, this was a difficulty that I'm now named the president, and all the vice presidents and deans are 10 years older than I am. So I don't know if you could picture that, but I had to somehow prove that I could be this president of the university to people who had been in these things. So I was able to do it. I think we got along very well, and I tried to take a low-key, thoughtful approach to things, and we eventually, really started to build some momentum. But one of the things I noticed is we had a very paternalistic culture at the University of Dayton. Every major decision came to the president's desk. Every day I'd walk into the office and there was another decision that the president was asked to be made, and should have been made by somebody else, someplace else in the organization, but they were all getting pushed up to the top. So I had to somehow think about how to change that culture, and it wasn't easy, but it took a lot of reflection and learning. In the middle years of my presidency, I began to recruit the team of people that I wanted, vice presidents and deans, and one of the things I was selling them on is we could really be an innovative institution. We could really move forward. But in some senses, I had picked up that old habit of, the president is king, and I'm trying to bring these new people in and say, we're going to do innovative things. And here's what the point I want to make is I really had to make a change in my behavior at that time. I had to change the style by which I was leading people, and I had to take a more collaborative approach to leadership. I had to bring people in and get them engaged in the process. And you go through a change like that, I'm telling you, it's not an easy behavioral change. If you've been learning to act one way and you've been successful, but now you know you have to do it a different way, it takes a lot of prayer, reflection, and talking with individuals. We really started to emphasize the university motto that you might hear from time to time, learn, lead, and serve. Got started at that time, and again, it was around this notion of how does the learning and scholarship of this campus lead us to make a difference in society and to serve the common good. So towards the end of my presidency, we put together, I think, a fairly good strategic plan that moved us into the future. We called it Vision 2005. You can see how far back that was, right? But the point was that we really began to muster and look at an integrated curriculum that here on campus. And the real emphasis, again, was on how can we shape the curriculum to raise up the issues of justice in our society. How can we prepare people, whether they're business or they're in education, to really look at how they're going to make a difference with their vocation, with what they're doing, and how do we prepare them for that activity. So as I stepped down, I began to take on this position, Father Free, Professor of Social Justice, and I really got involved in working in neighborhoods and in the Dayton community. I was a person who put together a group that was called the Child Protection Task Force, and we were able to really look at how we could deal with the deaths of children due to abuse that were taking place in the community. And again, there was an instance, and I tell this story to several people. I've heard this story from me, but one night I was working with a social worker, and I was going out to visit a mother who had her child taken away because she had an alcohol addiction, and the neighbors reported that she was neglecting this child. So I wanted to listen to how the social worker was working with her. And it was a long conversation, about 45 minutes, and the mother eventually said, yes, I want to get into rehab so I can be reunited with my child. And the social worker calls in onto the phone to get a placement for her. She was poor. She was going to have to depend on the county for her rehab program. Oh, I'm sorry. It's going to take 9 or 10 weeks to get her into the program. Well, what that said to me was this woman was heartbroken, and our systems were broken, and we had to find a way to change those things. So just against an instance of how we're working with the issues of changing systems in our community. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, I have been really working hard on this issue of poverty in our city. I just did a study a couple days ago. If you think and look at the city of Dayton, over 50% of our African American children live in high poverty neighborhoods, and 48% of our Hispanic children live in high poverty neighborhoods. If you know anything about the opportunities that children have in high poverty neighborhoods, it's very drastic. Their parents are working hard to put food on the table. Sometimes there's addiction, sometimes there's all kinds of problems. There's stress that's going on, and the schools are not very good for young people. This to me is a major problem of injustice in our community, and it's one of those things where I really try to see how can we mount people to think seriously about those issues. So let me just finish up with a few key things that I think are important as you go through your journey, as you go through your vocational journey. And I try to use mine to show you that there's certain key discernment points that you need to have, certain ways that you need to really reflect. The first thing I think is important is to have what I call an interior life and a sense of your own self-awareness. I can't tell you how important my own faith life, my own prayer life, my own community life as a religious has been very helpful in grounding myself in this journey that I've been on. Times of prayer and reflection have helped me really grow and to develop as an individual. Just this willingness to give yourself time to listen to God, to listen to the call that's in that process. And I watch students here on campus, and you're all so busy and so involved. I really would want to take the time to reflect, to take the time to step back and say, what's going on with my life? What are my priorities? What's really important to me? Second piece of advice is just to move out of your comfort zone. I obviously had to move out of my comfort zone when I was named president, and that really shaped and differed me in who I was, but I think travel can do that. I think getting involved in service to the poor is important. Something that just takes your mindset and just changes it, brings it out of some really questioning some assumptions. Be ready to learn and if necessary to change. And I think it can be really difficult as adults. I told you about a major change I had to make in my leadership style, and I teach a whole class on this, but just the short version of it is I had to learn to act differently. I had certain habits that I had that were not productive for the people that, and so going through the change process, listening to others I think was very important. Another one is to have good friends and mentors that can help you reflect on your own leadership work. I was very privileged to have one of our Marianist brothers, Brother Stan Matthews, was a person who I was able to talk to and to work with. He was older than I was, maybe he was like 20 years older, and he would just listen to me and reflect and help me think. I mean, find a good mentor, somebody that you trust and really can help you deal with the wisdom. But there's also having good friends. One of my colleagues that I was in the president's office and then worked together, Dick Ferguson, who was the first executive director of the Fitz Center. Dick was a person who I could go to after some of our meetings and say, Dick, what went wrong? You know, what happened in this meeting that it didn't go the way it should go? And he was a good enough friend that he could give me some honest feedback about how my behavior was part of the problem and how somebody else's behavior was part of the problem. But having a good friend that you can trust, I think, is extremely important. Be a good listener. I can't tell you how important listening is, to know the experiences of other people that you're working with, where they're coming from, what experiences have shaped their ways of thinking, what is their story. And as I work with students, I say, make sure as you're working in neighborhoods and working with children, listen to their story, because their story tells you so much about what shaped them and how the difficulties of their life. Again, another thing is learning to speak well. If you're going to be a leader, you're going to have to be able to have this ability to get across your message. You might not always be funny, you might not always be charismatic, but you have to be able to really be able to logically outline for people what it is that you're trying to move the group towards and what's important. So I know sometimes these kind of speech courses we have to go through, I do think they're important. They do teach us those basic skills you'll find that you'll need as you're leading. Another one is developing people. I think one of my greatest satisfactions and joys of my life is that I have been able to work with people who have really grown and developed. There's lots of students that I worked with that are now doing just outstanding work in international development or in politics or just simple teaching of school that I have been part of what they've been doing. But the concept was how to develop their skills. You're going to be working with people all the time in a team situation. You're going to be supervising people. How can you develop their gifts? How can you develop their talents and give them a sense of joy? And then develop a collegial style of leadership, how to bring people together to reflect and to think together on a problem, to actively seek out other people's perspectives. I think that's extremely important in what you do. And it takes time. Working as a group and collectively, it gets messy. It would be easy if you could just shout out the orders and move things along, but trying to involve people, bringing them together, takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of hard work, but it really pays off in the excellence of what's happening. Another thing is to develop an open and transparent leadership style. Try to always explain to people why it is that you are doing certain things or why certain things are happening. I have this theory, which is always proven quite true, is that if there's ever a vacuum, an ambiguity, people will fill it up with their story, not with your story, but with their story. And so it's important to really communicate to people what's going on and tell them the reasons of why you did certain things. And oftentimes you have to explain to people you're doing certain things which they may not particularly like. but if you can give them the reasons why you've done it and what you think is important, that really helps. And in that transparency style is at times to admit that you are wrong, that you made a mistake, that you did something that could have been done in a better way. I remember a couple of times just apologizing to the faculty here at the University of Dayton when I was president that we weren't communicating as well as we needed to. We weren't getting the message out about the decisions that we made. And two last ones I'll give you. One is just develop your critical thinking skills and your foresight skills, the ability to look forward. Whenever we're making a decision, it's not trying just to get that immediate decision, what's the best thing to do, but where will that decision take us? What doors will it open and what doors will it close? Because it's important to see that life is a flow, right? And decisions that we make, they follow one after another. And I think that's pretty important. Critical thinking. I know your professors, when they grade your papers and do things, are challenging you to think more clearly, more logically. Again, that skill is extremely important as you move forward. And my final skill, I think that's important, and I have some papers up here if you would like to get where I talk about it more forcefully. In our society today, we're extremely polarized. We have, all kinds of difficulties on the political scene. We have polarization within our Catholic Church. We have polarizations within our community, and we have polarization within our, with our universities even. So this ability to bring people together to constructively think about difficult questions is really an important skill to develop. And it's not an easy one to develop. You have to be a good listener. You have to be a good advocate of situations. You really have to be able to bring people together and build that kind of common vision. That's important. So again, as I said, I brought some things up here if you want something on just that skill of working in a polarized situation. I think that's important. So again, it's kind of the journey. I think the things that are important in that process is that for me, it was a faith dimension, that constantly reflecting and thinking with what God had to say in my life. He doesn't speak to me directly, but he kind of, hints to me. I think listening to good friends and good people that are part of your life, the relationships that you have, they can be very supportive in your growth and in your choice of vocation. Being part of a community that really cares about something that's really significant, I think, is important in that whole process. And again, see it as a journey. You don't discover your vocation at the end of 4 years. You don't discover it completely halfway through your life. It's something that you continue to reflect and think about. So those are my comments for you. So I think that, again, any choice of like a career orientation. So let's just talk about engineering as a kind of career choice. You have to ask yourself the question of how am I going to do good through that career choice? And, I think the reason I chose it to begin with is that I thought if I become an engineering professor, I was going to be able to influence people. I was going to be able to shape their lives. And this whole concept of educating leaders was important to me. So there's a kind of image that drives us as we think about our vocation. And I think our vocation can be discovered in any profession. It's business, or it's engineering, or it's teaching. So again, I think that's keep reflecting on what is it that's kind of driving you to do what you want to do. Yes, engineers can make some good money and they can support a good family. That's all true. But is that all that you want? What is it that you want? And so, the I found, like when I was working with Catholic Relief Services and when I was working on the world food problem, I used a lot of engineering ideas. And I felt I was able to use the knowledge that I had to do something good for people. And I think if you can figure out how is it that my career creates a good for others, I think that can be a big help for you. It's a good question. I think I can pull up two good ones. One is that I was a consultant for Catholic Relief Services as a professor here at UD, and I was helping them understand how they would do integrated development. And I worked with a group in Africa in which there was a desertification going on, and these nomadic people were losing their grazing land. And you could see the impact on those people. You could see the impact of actually death, and so I think that, you know, learning how to do appropriate agriculture in the middle of Africa was a real challenge that we had to bring Catholic Relief Services to work with. Again, one of my most you know, things where I almost blew my stack, but I actually didn't do it. But I was very prone. Was that we were working to bring food up to starving people in the middle of Africa, and corruption hit us because we were moving the trucks up to the border, and we had to unload all the trucks and put them on another set of trucks, which were the Queen's trucks of the country that we were entering. You know, and that just decimated the time and energy. So seeing corruption was a thing that hit me there. But again, I really developed a love for working with people because of how I saw Catholic Relief Services working to engage people in the solution of their problems. And I've been using that same kind of methodology as I work with neighborhoods here in Dayton. So I think that had a big impression on me.
Thank you.
Yeah. My relationship with my brother Jim. Well, I think there's you know, obviously I'm the oldest in the family. There's two in between us, and then there's Jim. There's my sister Mary Ann, and then there's 11 years to my brother Mike. So my brother Mike was a first-year student my first year as president of the University of Dayton. So you can. This is where I think relationships in every family are unique. Because of our age difference, going through grade school and parts of high school, Jim and I were not particularly close. He would watch myself and my brother Tom fight and couldn't understand what was going on, and you know, those type of things. But I do think that as we grew older, there were things that happened. First is both of us had leadership positions. He was in our religious community, and I was here at the university. We could be good friends to talk in confidence with one another about issues and how things go. One of the roles that I appreciate that my brother Jim plays in our family is particularly with my sister Mary Ann, who went through some very difficult you know, issues in her life in the sense of relationships. And the same thing with my youngest brother Mike, some difficult things with relationships. Jim was a great listener to help them to really understand and work through what they're doing. So I don't know, the lesson I draw off the top of my head from that is that you're a community as a family, and you have to figure out what the roles are that you play with one another, and how do you play those roles so that you enrich each other's lives. I think, you know, we have great family celebrations because we can tell stories about one another, how goofy we were as kids, but we can also tell stories about how we enriched and helped each other. So I think that's a big thing with families. those are really great. So I think that one of the interesting stories where I had to learn something was, you all know where the law building is in the front of the campus here? Well, in that beautiful lawn place there was a Frisch's a long time ago, a big Frisch's building. And then there was a gas station down at the bottom. So, we were looking at the future of the university, and we wanted, can't have a Frisch's at the front entrance. This is not going to be a classy university. So I knew the person, Mr. Gagel, who owned the Frisch's, and I said, okay, I'm going to go talk to him, and I'm going to say, we're going to give you the best deal we can give you for giving us that land. And I talked, and he was very polite with me, and he said, no, I'm not going to sell. So I went back and talked to the chairman of our board at that time, who was Jesse Phillips of the Phillips Humanities Center. And he said, well, let me go talk to him. And Mr. Phillips went down to Mr. Gagel and said, what is it that you really want to do? And I'm going to make this real short. Mr. Gagel wanted to make sure his grandson had a future. So we came back, and what we did was we made a trust that would be given to the young man when he was of a certain age in exchange for the land. And so Mr. Gagel got what he wanted, and the university got what we wanted. Now, the moral of that story is you have to really understand people's interests when you're working and negotiating with it, and I think that's one example. I think the other, another, just a habit of when something isn't going right, really just take time to reflect on it and think about what role you had in making it go wrong. And every situation's complicated, but we all, usually on these complicated situations, we could take some responsibility for the mess we're in. And so try to figure out how it is that we can untangle that mess as we reflect and think about it. So I do think, if looking back on it, it's probably much more complex than I'm going to explain it, but one of the things that as I said in the talk, I approached the interview process, which was pretty extensive, by saying, I'm going to tell them the best things I can about where the university needs to go. And so in that process, I developed some sense that I had a couple good ideas, right? That there was something that was there. And then I had said initially, as I said, I didn't have a snowball's chance to make it into in the final, but I said, if I get there, I'm going to go do it. And so then I was faced with a complex kind of situation. Fortunately, the Board of Trustees was thoughtful enough to give me a whole year just to do transition into that process. So I said, okay, I'm going to go try to find the best ideas I can for how we can make the University of Dayton grow and move towards in the future. And so I did visiting with people. I really went and talked to the best people I could talk to about what can happen. And I spent a lot of time on the campus talking to people. So I wasn't the authority figure, but they knew I was going to be. So people were really willing to tell me what was on their mind. And so pulling all that together, I thought I had a pretty good picture coming into it. So again, my notion is you got to listen to people. If you decide to do something, then listening to people to understand what's the best way to go and what's going to work and not work.